Hello and welcome to Pathways, where you are invited to join me for a visit with leaders in personal development and cultural evolution. This is your host, Paul O'Brien. Well, this episode of Pathways is going to take an in-depth look at the current rage, mindfulness. Now, we've done a lot of shows around the subject of mindfulness, and it's widely praised as a path to spiritual awakening and as a way to experience life more intentionally. But what if that's just the beginning of the story? Could there be more to mindfulness than we've come to understand? Well, our guest today thinks so. Our guest, Will Johnson, is the author of Radiant Mindfulness, How to Reach the Awakened State Beyond the Mind. Will is the director of the Institute for Embodiment Training and the founder of Bambu Hueco, a retreat center in Costa Rica that views the body as the doorway to spiritual growth and transformation. The author of several books, including Breathing Through the Whole Body, The Radical Path of Somatic Dharma, Breathing as a Spiritual Practice, and Eyes Wide Open. He teaches a deeply body-oriented approach to sitting meditation at Buddhist centers around the world. He lives in Costa Rica. Well, hello, Will, and welcome back to the Pathways Show.
Hey, good to see you. Happy to be here.
So I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask you, why another book on mindfulness? What
Yeah,
motivated you to write Radiant Mindfulness?
so that's interesting. When I had the idea of writing Radiant Mindfulness, I got a hold of my publisher's Inner Traditions, and we had exactly this conversation. Why another book on mindfulness? And uh, a couple of things. The proliferation of mindfulness practices around the world, one of the good news stories, right? Having said that, I view the practices that are so prevalent within the mindfulness community as wonderfully foundational, but they're foundational. And, they address the opening concerns of awakening and create a foundation for a culmination into kind of a radiant awakening that the Buddha, the historical Buddha himself, speaks of, saying, do these fundamental practices, classical mindfulness, but then don't just observe breath. There is an experience you can have as you breathe in, as you breathe out. It's as though breath and body become one. And breath, you can feel it almost like a wave, powerful wave moving through the entire body. Breath breathes through the entire body. And what happens, we take the good work that we've done with our mind, with mindfulness. And then we start awakening the profound energies of the body and liberate breath from its imprisonment. And, uh, most people, we breathe very, very shallowly. And the Buddha says there's something that could happen if you could figure it out as you breathe in through the whole body, breathe in through the whole thing. And as you do that, and it's entirely somatic practice, right? He doesn't mention mind or awareness. Just do this, and there's a radiant, altogether natural, radiant awakening that just starts happening. So that's why this book came into being.
The breath is an ever fascinating topic of attention. And it seems to me like you could make the argument that we are being breathed by fill in the blank, God or whatever.
Totally. Yes, you could make that argument that we are, that we don't necessarily breathe. We are being breathed because
Right.
you can't stop it. Having said that, most humans, tragically, we've fallen into this pattern of doing our very best to resist the fullness of its potency.
Well, one of the standard meditation techniques, and I used to teach Vipassana,
Right.
but it's not just a Buddhist meditation technique, it's the mindfulness of
Sure.
breath or the mindfulness of breathing. And people sit still, and the idea is to sit still, be as still as possible so that you don't have any distractions. In fact, you sit through pain, perhaps, whatever. The imperative is to sit still. But you seem to think that the way of meditation, the way it's taught, needs to be different for Westerners.
Okay. Mindfulness, classic Anapana practice, just watching the breath, maybe focusing your awareness right at the tip of your nose. And you can get very still and very concentrated, and you watch the breath go in and go out. Hey, look, this is wonderful practice. It helps us get out of our monkey mind. And breath becomes a little smoother and more regular, which is a big advancement over what passes as normal. Most people, honestly, if you take a look at how you're breathing right now, you aren't breathing very much at all. There's hardly any exchange of air going in and out of the nostrils. Now, the Buddha is saying, okay,
Why is that a problem?
why
Why
is
is
that?
that a problem? I mean, maybe I don't need that much oxygen.
Well, if
I'm
you want,
trying to share the oxygen.
okay, okay, okay. But if you want to stand a chance of experiencing what the Buddha was telling us, he said, no, start off just becoming aware. Okay, you got some awareness, that's better. But now what you got to figure out, boys and girls, is how to really breathe through the whole body. And look, that ain't a sniff. There's a letting go through the body. You have to bring body to awareness. And frankly, sitting like a stone garden statue of the Buddha hurts after a while. And there's no way sitting completely still that you could even possibly get anywhere close experiencing a breath that just goes through the whole body, just like a wave through water. So nothing wrong with it. It's just limiting.
Okay. And how is it that breath determines consciousness?
Yeah, good question. I don't really know. You just acknowledge that it does, but I think what it is uh, uh, breath determines physiology, and physiology determines consciousness. And I don't know, I might be, splitting hairs there, but there's something. Look, the the breath that passes is normal, right? It's hardly even there. What it does, it supports a consciousness of lost in thought and really enmeshed in self-image. And again, that's part of who we are, okay? But body, the physiology of that breath, you don't feel much of anything or ache or low energy, okay? Now, if you were to flip that on its head and figure out what the Buddha is after, there's a breath, he said, that as you breathe in, you can feel it breathing through the whole body. I think of this uh, as like an inhalation, as an instrument that administers a kiss of love to every single cell in the body. And it's felt, it's palpable. Ah, okay. And it's infinitely more delicious. I mean, you know that, right?
Lost in thought is a really seems like a really good way to describe someone who's in their head.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was Thich Nhat Hanh when he first came to France from Vietnam. Both the North and the South Vietnamese wanted him out of the country. And he was asked, well, what is your first impression of Western culture? And his response was lost in thought. So,
Wow.
you know what? What- So I've really paid so much attention. This for me has been a path of awakening the body. When you're lost in thought, you don't feel anything. But there are these shimmering sensations, these little pinprick blips of feeling stuff, potentially everywhere in the body. Some of them are very pleasurable, some of them are quite painful, but they are there. If we could switch our perspective from lost in thought to awakening up the body, that then
Right.
gives us a platform that, like I say, perhaps we stand a chance of how to be so relaxed, so let go at the onset of an inhalation that, oh, that's what the Buddha was talking about. I felt it.
Okay, so
Wait,
how do you flip the switch?
how do you?
That's the crux of the matter, right?
Okay.
Making that switch.
So there is the step by step by step route, which is basically what I teach, or the suddenly let's just do it route. that is also kind of what I teach. Here's the foundation. Let's say I want to learn how to breathe through my whole body. I become aware, yeah, I just examine my breath. It's hardly anything there. Yes, it keeps me alive, but no way can it fuel the physiological shift into awakening. Okay. Okay. Well, awakening, let's
Really,
see.
because it takes a lot of energy to awaken.
Well, yeah, it does. And it does. It does. And it
It's
does.
not the same thing as falling asleep.
Yeah. You have to be. I do see that these practices bring out a strength, a physical strength, just in terms of
Uh-huh.
physical uh, physical body. But the first thing I acknowledged in my life was that, okay, I'm lost in thought. I'm up here in my head. Oh, I just found out that there are these little pinprick blips of sensation. I'll have people just hold out a right hand, palm up. What's going on? Some people, oh, heavy. I feel the air. But if you go right into the middle of the hand, it's like jillions of vibratory little motions, right? And I don't know, is it the cellular dance? Is it even subatomic vibratory? But we could feel that. But being lost in thought, make sure that we feel nothing of that. So that's one of the first shifts. So I'm going to start, going through my body. I call it, I send out invitations to every cell in my body that it's okay to shift and let your felt presence be felt. And there is a
Now,
place. Yeah.
is this a resolution that you make, or that there's a plan, or there's a reminder that reminds you to you're in lost in thought? I mean, it occurs to me that if I'm lost in thought, I'm not probably paying close enough attention to make the switch
Yeah.
or
Well,
to yeah.
yeah. And that's often the first thing that happens. I wake up, ooh, lost in thought, mind. Oh, mind, thank you for reminding me that I have forgotten to not only send out the invitations to every cell in my body to let its felt shimmer come alive, but as soon as the sensation accepts my invitation, I greet it with this gesture of letting go and relaxation. Okay. And this is like body starting to come alive, coming out of, frankly, the horror of sitting like a stone garden statue of the Buddha, which can be so.
Or sitting in a cubicle
And
in a
acute.
skyscraper.
Exactly. Exactly. So there's that. First of all, it's going to be bringing this, I call it the shimmer, the felt shimmer of the body alive. And second of all, a breath that's going to breathe through the whole body. It's just like how a wave moves through a body of water. I realize that, wherever there's tension that I'm holding back on the breath, I can just start letting go of that. I can start letting go of that. Now, look, the spine, let's just talk about the spine. The spine for most people is like a Roman column, right? Swedenborg, this 18th century mystic,
Right.
attributes his awakening to his observation. For him, what breath was all about was keeping his spine in constant motion. This is before we know that there's oxygen in the air, to keeping his spine on the inhalation and the exhalation of breath in constant motion. The rib cage is not a medieval suit of armor. Those ribs, a breath could, blow up the rib cage like a balloon if we were really to let go. But generally, our breath is so small. That's partly because we're holding everything so still. We've got this straitjacket on. So look at my deal. I've been led through the body and really experiencing where the body comes alive, where I have the courage to experience the primal contractions and go into them and feel them and accept them. And, man, every place of chronic pain is a place that takes your breath away, but not in a good way. You just
Right. Right.
break, you know? And so sometimes in this, releasing, awakening that lets go, it can be, uh, oh, ecstatic shimmer. And then all of a sudden, the next thing you know, that just opened up the possibility for the next layer of the deep primal contraction to come up.
And how does this, can you interrelate this with the concept of radiant mindfulness?
Yeah, because that's the practice. We just sit here, breath by breath. It's, a true embracing and opening to what's real right now, what I feel right now, what I would like to feel, what I think I should feel, This is it. There is presence here. Most of us, most of the time, and certainly most mind oriented meditation practices may completely miss the reality that on every part of the body there's shimmer. And if you let that come up, things just start happening. It's like riding a wave, liberating a current takes you into an opening. The next thing I know, there's a contraction, and you
I
just
think that's,
good.
I think you're, absolutely right. And this is why a lot of Vipassana courses, which is primarily a mental sit still form, they do this sweeping of the body parts
Yeah,
that gets you to feel that shimmer in every part of the body, which is I find that to be a very common thing at Vipassana sessions.
yeah. Well, that's
But
certainly the ubakin oriented vipassana that is really helps awaken your awareness of sensations. What I would love to see it do is, okay, you awaken the sensations now. Relax, let go, yield, because that's takes it to a whole different level.
now this brings up one of the kind of controversial things in your book about
Sure.
how Buddhism can adapt to Western society.
Uh-huh.
And this kind of relates to what you're saying about, allowing for motion, you know. I think, like even in the strict Vipassana tradition, they allow for it, but you're supposed to label it as you're doing it kind of thing. I spent this time at a spiritual center in southern France where they was Master Ivanhoff, and they had meals just incredible with silver and linen and everything. And the whole thing was not only to be silent during the meal, but not to have the slightest clink of silver against glass. It was quite a meditation, and the whole big group was doing it. But anyway, you kind of are exploring the spectrum on the other side of the stillness thing,
Yeah.
by saying that Buddhism could like benefit from um intersecting with like rave dancing.
Yeah. That's the extreme example, but the Dharma coming over here can not only benefit from interacting with what's actually going on in the culture, it absolutely has to do that, as it has always done when it's moved into a new territory. It changes what's going on in this new culture, and the practices change. The most striking example is the teachers from northern India climbing the Himalayas onto the Tibetan plateau. They encounter the indigenous Bambu people, shamanistic, animistic, a very well laid out religious system. Tibetan Vajrayana looks more like Bampo than it does like what the Buddha was doing, right? So it's
Right.
coming again to this wildly different culture. I look back on my life and I go, okay, what are the explosive, homegrown, spiritual events that have happened in my culture during the time that I've been alive? And one of the things is that everybody now is moving. The ubiquity of music, and the music is being played, is music that our young at heart want to move to. So that certainly is one thing, that we found.
Especially if they've taken certain drugs,
But yeah, which is
which is the other thing you bring up.
the second one. You know, uh, like it or not, and I have been one who has liked it, that there has been an advent and availability of entheogenic substances from cannabis to psilocybin to LSD to MDMA that have occurred in our culture. And it's interesting, Paul. What I see is that I'll just talk about it as doing formal sitting practices. If you're doing a very traditional uh, Vipassana-oriented practice, sitting like a still garden statue of the Buddha, keeping your mind on your nostrils, watching the breath, or even labeling what's happening, thought, breath, whatever,
And
right?
counting the breath.
Yeah. These substances do not work well. Okay, they make it really don't. But I'm actually seeing, and this sounds grandiose, I know that, but I'm seeing that the Dharma coming to the West, it's an entirely new turning of the wheel. And again, as I said, the opening instruction on breath from the Buddha was just to be aware, even outside of your body and front. The culminating one now is an explosive awakening through the body and a liberation of breath. And that's what I think we in the West are uniquely equipped to from kind of our homegrown experiments with awakening. And it fits right into a body awakening, breath liberating kind of Western Dharma. We have to create a uniquely Western Dharma.
No,
Uh,
but you take tools like entheogens and MDMA. It's a two-edged sword. I mean, you can use it to entertain yourself. It could be an ego, activity,
right.
or it could be a spiritually revelatory activity.
Totally, totally. In fact, Humphrey Osmond even said he hoped that his problem child would be used for meditation, and then it would become a wonder child. So it is interesting. I'll say this briefly. I'm a child of the 60s. We'd pop the pill in our mouth, go into the mountains, and the substance was the therapist. By the end of the afternoon, we had opened to the big, whatever you want to call it. Okay. The psychotherapists now, in a sense, want to, be the purveyors of psychedelics and are doing wonderful work with intractable issues like PTSD and trauma. If there were too few guardrails in the 60s, some people got in trouble, right? Who shouldn't have been taking it. Nowadays, there's too many. And I love the psychotherapeutic uses of these substances, but we want people to go out and have the opening, the big opening on their own. Now, what I'm proposing in terms of Western Dharma, both the 60s and the psychotherapy are using large doses, right? Really large doses. You're on your back, surrendering and spinning, and they do teach you how to let go. I like the notion of, okay, I've had my vision quest. I've done some of my basic work with some of my neurotic shadows. Now I want to practice that I'm going to do every day that keeps exploring that awakening and opening. So I find with these practices that I teach the orientation, either the sitting practice or taking it out into the world as mindfulness practice, yeah, a small amount of
And
cannabis.
which do you prefer?
Which
LSD, mushrooms, MDMA?
I mostly use cannabis with the practices. I use or a small amount. I like a small amount of LSD. I prefer that with
Uh,
these practices. Now, MDMA is to me, MDMA is so relational. And look, while we're kind of upping the ante in this conversation, what my wife and I like to do with MDMA, and we'll take a good strong dose, for me more than her because she's smaller. And then we like cozying up at either ends of a sofa and opening into the gazing practice, just looking at each other and holding each other's gaze and just surrendering to that for the next 5 or 6 hours. And listeners of Paul O'Brien's wonderful pathway show, that is an experience. It needs to be experienced to be believed how extraordinary that
it
is.
sounds like it. It sounds like a very not only therapeutic for yourself, but a relationally therapeutic thing to do.
You know, uh, basically what happens, you enter into a shared consciousness
Right,
together, but it is so physically healing. There would be times of tears, times of weeping, times of hysterical laughter. It
right. Hmm.
moving.
maybe that's what long-term marriage depends on, is something akin to that
Yeah,
type of shared experience.
yeah, yeah. Well,
It occurs to me.
what
Well,
happens with long-term relationships? You want to keep them alive.
right, exactly. Well, hey, Will, there's so much more for us to talk about, but once again, we have run out of time for the radio show. But I want to be sure to tell our listeners about your website, which is embodiment.net. One word, embodiment.net. And you can find all kinds of good stuff there related to Will's work and his teachings and his events, maybe some stuff about Bambu Hueco, which we didn't get to talk about today, but maybe we will some other time. But anyway, for those who may be listening to Pathways live on a Sunday morning and tuned in late, this is your host, Paul O'Brien, producer of the Visionary I Ching Oracle, an app that supports great decisions and perfect timing. We're so glad that you're with us today. Please note that you have the ability to review hundreds of interviews in our online archive at divination.com. And you can play and or share this particular interview with Will whenever you want via the internet or as a free podcast, and I'll tell you how in a minute. Today we've been visiting with Will Johnson, author of Radiant Mindfulness, How to Reach the Awakened State Beyond the Mind. And I want to say a heartfelt thank you to all of our listeners for tuning into Pathways, which is currently broadcast on KBOO FM in Portland, Oregon. You can get a free subscription to the Pathways podcast, which you can also find at divination.com. That's DIVI nation.com, or by searching Pathways Radio on Paulo's YouTube channel, where you can also give us a thumbs up and subscribe. Feel free to forward a link to your friends. And this is Paulo bidding you adieu and reminding you to tell your friends about Pathways podcasts. And thanks again to Will Johnson and to all of you listeners for tuning in and being a part of the Pathways conversation.